whatever. So you have that perception. Now, I'm sure there have been times that I've been next to or behind or in front of an elderly person that was driving very appropriately and was driving the speed limit, and that would technically be contradictory information. I directly had a contradiction of my pre-existing explanation and set of qualities for that person, but it doesn't mean that my perception has changed. I would still say overarchingly that old people drive slowly. So that contradictory information that we ignore, sometimes we're not even aware that we're ignoring those contradictions, and that means that we're just further reiterating that stereotype. Now, to play devil's advocate, is it necessarily bad to categorize people? So can you say, no, I think that categorizing people is helpful, and these are my reasons why? Or you would say, yes, I absolutely think that it's bad to categorize people because X, Y, and Z. And so that's something that you may want to share with me in your reflection post. And if you'd like, also give me some examples of stereotypes. What are the most common stereotypes that you can think of? Okay, more barriers. Imposing consistency. So in this case, we overestimate consistency in others' behaviors and ignore fluctuations. In other words, we assign consistent behavioral patterns even when they're not always there. So there may be times when someone who would normally be shy is very outgoing and friendly and gregarious, but we tend to ignore those moments and fall back on our impression that they are consistently shy. Now, focusing on the negative might be another barrier that we don't really think of sometimes. And like I said before, people are more likely to complain with negative experiences or negative, scenarios online. Same type of concept here with perception. People give more weight to negative information than positive information. So if we communicate something negative, that often means that people perceive that more significantly than anything positive. One piece of negative information can offset several pieces of positive information. And do you have any examples of that? Can you think of, something specifically where one piece of negative information kind of overrode several pieces of positives? Okay, so fundamental attribution error. This is a pretty big concept. I know it sounds like theoretical mumbo-jumbo, but I'll give you a very condensed version of the definition. Basically, it is a tendency to believe that people are to blame rather than assume a behavior is out of their control or based on their situation. In other words, if someone is late to a meeting with you, and you're frustrated because you're waiting and you don't want to be patient and they should have been there on time, whatever. Sorry. So the tendency to believe people are to blame. So they show up and you already have this perception of, they are late because they didn't get up in time, or they didn't time manage well, or they didn't leave with enough time to consider traffic, whatever the situation may be. We blame them rather than assume a behavior is out of their control or based on the situation. So maybe they did get up on time and they left with plenty of time and they time managed very well, but there was a huge accident and they were stuck in traffic for 30 minutes. That would be out of their control based on a situation, but the fundamental attribution error is that, no, it was your fault because you did X, Y, and Z. It's kind of a blaming negative type of barrier, but it's something that we do pretty consistently. Now, on the opposite side of that spectrum, we have a self-serving bias. We have a tendency to believe our own behavior is more positive than someone else's. So what's interesting is we say it's not my fault when something goes wrong, but we take credit when good things happen. So we tend to blame other people with the fundamental attribution error, but then we tend to say, well, it was based on situation, it was out of my control when something goes wrong. But then if something goes well, of course I handled that very well, and that was good for me. So Self-serving bias is one of the most difficult obstacles to becoming other-oriented, and you're going to hear that word a lot. If we are constantly operating out of a self-serving bias, it hurts our communications. And I'd like maybe for you to think about how might that hurt communication, and why is that so important to be aware of a self-serving bias in your post? Okay, so, oh my goodness, my son kept me up all night. I'm very sorry, I'm so tired. Okay, interpreting behaviors of others. So now that we have our perceptions, now that we have perceived something, what do? There are several approaches to interpreting behaviors. So let's kind of go through those. We have our attribution theory, and we've talked about several of those. We attach motives and causes to people's behavior. So that's a very short definition of what we talked about. We try to use common sense to explain what others do instead of verifiable data. So again, we are assigning motives and things, but we don't really necessarily have any proof that that is true. And then, we can talk about the armchair psychologists who sit and, someone talks and they say, and they take their notes. And, that is often attaching motives and causes. And, it's not necessarily accurate because what someone might disclose does not show the whole picture. So that attribution theory can be pretty significant. So we talked about different types of attribution theory. This is a causal attribution theory now. So in this situation, there's circumstance, stimulus, or the person. So we're trying to come up with cause. Okay, so with circumstance, you believe the person acted in a certain way because the situation left no choice. So they had to rob the bank because they had no way to feed their children, and their children were starving, and the situation left no choice. They had to get money to buy food for their children. Okay, that's an extreme case, but that would be circumstantial. So we are making causality based on a circumstance. Now, a stimulus would be you believe the person acted in response to an incentive. So the stimulus was, I wanted to have a new pair of shoes, so I stole them from the store. Okay, there was an incentive. So they were responding to a stimulus or something that they wanted. Now, the person, perhaps you believe there's a quality about the person. So that is more of a more specific type of thing. Circumstance is a little bit further distant. Stimulus, person was acting in response to an incentive. But then if it's the person is the cause, that person just happens to be a very, criminal-minded person, so they behaved that way. Less distant with the attribution or the cause. Okay, and then finally, we've talked about a lot of theories, I know, and it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around, but I just wanted you to have all the specifics because these will all help understand perception, and we'll use some of these later on in the semester as we talk about new concepts too. So, okay, standpoint theory. Your perception is based on where you are. So, we talk about you have your point of view, or, you take a stand on something. Standpoint theory, it's your perception of things based on where you are. So it's contingent on your social position, your level of power, your cultural background, your value system, your status as student or boyfriend or girlfriend or, employee, whatever. Cultural background affects how you perceive someone's behavior. So all of those things would affect, of course, your perception. It's your standpoint. It's where you are in this particular moment based on the collective experience of everything that you've gone through. Obviously, where you stand influences what you see. I like to think about you can be in a valley looking up at mountains all around you, and you may feel, that you're in the middle of a deserted island. You have no idea what's on the other side of that. Now, on the flip side, you climb up that mountain and you stand on the top of it and you realize that you're in the middle of rainforest and it goes on for miles and miles and miles. So, where you stand and what you're able to witness influences your perception. And I'm curious, how strong do you think its impact is? And do you agree? So do you think that you can get away from that, that even your collective experiences that have led you to where you are and who you are, that you can kind of remove yourself from that, and that you can have a more objective perspective on things? And then how do you see things differently, and what are the descriptors of where you are? That might be something that you want to include in your final presentation, your personal growth presentation. If you were to answer those questions now and then toward the end of the semester, how do you see things differently than other people? Why? What are the descriptors of where you are? Your social position, your level of power, your cultural background, whatever those things that you see are important as far as how you see the world. And, how strong is that impact for you? Alrighty, so preconceived explanations. You can write these down or just think about them in your head, whatever you'd like to do. But what is your first explanation of the cause that a person did not call you back after a first date? A waitress gives you lousy service. Your car is not repaired after you pay a high service fee. A teacher is late for class. A child beats up other children. A student is copying test answers from the student next to them. Or a mother refusing to let her teenage son drive the car on Friday nights. And if you need to pause so that you can kind of go through those one by one, feel free to do that. But what is your first explanation of the cause of why those situations might have taken place? And if you would like to let me know about that in your reflection, I'd be happy to hear it. Now that you've done that, what are some alternative explanations for each behavior? So go back through those and say, well, this could also be a cause, and then consider how might you be sure which one is correct. Might be interesting to kind of have a different perspective and see how your first impression or perception is not always an accurate one. And so let's talk about accuracy. It's our ability to make effective and complete observations. Because remember, incomplete, we try to finish them. Thinking back on page 73, we try to finish things and we try to complete things. So we need to make sure that we have accurate, complete observations instead of trying to fill in information, because filling in information is not always the case. Our accuracy is the degree to which we are able to directly observe cause and effect. Remember, verifiable data is important. We make perceptions based on certain things, but we need to be able to test those theories sometimes and say, okay, this actually is legitimate truth, and so let's make a perception based on that. So cause and effect. It's based on completeness of our information. It's our ability to rule out other causes like we just did. Okay, our first impression was someone didn't call me back on the first date after the first date because they didn't like me. Well, let's rule out other causes. Maybe they lost our phone number. Maybe they had to go out of town on business and they're going to call back in a few days. So there may be other causes that can help accuracy. We often try to compare a person's response with how other people might typically respond. So we get back into that comparison or that judgment where we're saying, well, I think most people would respond this way, so is this person responding in the way that I would organize this or understand this typically? And then we can improve our level of understanding by being aware of the assumptions we make when we interpret them. That's what this whole chapter is about, trying to improve our level of understanding so that our assumptions can be more accurate and that we are interpreting behaviors correctly. So how can we improve our skills? That's the, million-dollar question. Improve our awareness of factors that lead to inaccuracy. So we've looked at all these barriers. We've looked at ways that sometimes we're challenged in this, Okay, so let's look at factors that lead to